Gary Hoffman, a pleasure to be speaking with you, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you and playing with you this week.
Vice versa.
Yeah, here in Hong Kong. When I walked into our first rehearsal, I thought that was a beautiful cello, and I was also taken by this very interesting plaque you have on your tailpiece.
Right.
And that was like maybe one of the first things I asked you about it. Could you tell me a little bit about the story of this instrument and just your history with it?
The cello is Nicolò Amati, 1662. And it's known to many people as the Ex-Leonard Rose because he played on this cello from 1952 until his death, and that was in the fall of '84. And it was really a situation of being in the right place at the right time, because you know how those things are. You have to have a certain amount of good fortune. You have to actually, you know, have the wherewithal, but you also have to be sort of hot on the trail. And in this particular case, I did have the opportunity to acquire the cello, and it didn't take me long to figure out. It took a little bit of time to figure out how I was going to do it, in fact. But that's 38 years ago now.
Wow,
and,
it's a life
coming on 39, and you know, it's been a part of me all those years. And the issue of the little plaque, as I understand it, at the time, Rose went to a very well-known luthier at the time. I believe many of those people at that time did go. Oskar Shumsky was another. His name was Erwin Hertel. And I believe it was Hertel who suggested to some of his illustrious clients, like Leonard Rose, and I believe Shumsky too, I may be wrong about that, but I do recall, to do such a thing. So of course he somehow had him sign something, and there was an engraving process, and that is actually his signature on that gold piece on the tailpiece. After that, of course, you know, it does call attention. Several people have mentioned over the years that perhaps I should take it off and put my name there, and or at least add my name. It's not exactly my style, but yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it's as much part of the cello as any other aspect of the instrument. And you know, for us, of course, the history of these instruments and all that it's gone through is very important and significant in terms of what these instruments are. I know the history back to about 1850. Some of it is written in some of the documentation that came along with the cello. So one very important person who was associated with this cello was a Russian count who was himself an amateur cellist, and apparently a good one. And he was friends, in fact, with Mendelssohn and with Schumann. Wow. And Mendelssohn dedicated the second cello sonata to him. And I don't know this with certainty because he did possess other fine instruments, but he did have this cello. And it's possible that, in fact, Mendelssohn heard him play this cello and that particular piece. I'd like to think so. I don't have any absolute proof of it. The other thing that I know pertaining to those two composers is that Schumann was visiting Russia with his wife, Clara. And as I understand it, he was in the process of writing the piano quartet. We know there's that famous cello solo in the third movement. And he did meet Vielgorsky. That was this Russian count's name, Vielgorsky, and apparently found him to be a very fine cellist. So we know at least he heard him play. Did he hear him play that solo? And was it on this cello? I think it's possible.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's quite an unbelievable thing. Obviously for us, when we are so attuned to these historical aspects of what we do, those composers and the people they might have known, and in this particular case, perhaps the instruments that they might have known.
Yeah, and that's already a long way along in the journey of this instrument's life.
Absolutely, and we're still missing, I'm missing 2 centuries.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, so I really don't know. That's as far as I know. I have to admit, I've not investigated that. I wouldn't exactly know how to go about that, but I haven't. And so I'm actually incapable of giving any more information than that. I know that in the 20th century, before it came into the hands of Leonard Rose, it belonged to two English doctors, physicists, physicians. I mean, I believe they were doctors of some sort, and obviously amateur players. I presume they played. I don't know that for sure. But it was in England for about 50 years. Rose acquired it in 1952. I believe it came over from England, went to Wurlitzer. And Wurlitzer was, of course, a great firm. It doesn't exist anymore. But he bought it from Rembert Wurlitzer. And this is just a rather charming but interesting note, not something that would ever be talked about, but I have the delivery report. Rembert Wurlitzer to Leonard Rose, Great Neck, Long Island. Description, Nicolò Amati cello, quantity, 1. I always thought that was cute. No, maybe 2, but for the price of 1, no.
Can I ask, 38 years along in your relationship with this instrument, has there been any significant change? Have you noticed an arc or a trajectory of any sort?
Yes. It's something that happened very early on. After that, of course, there is a period, as with all these instruments, of sort of developing, adjusting, evolving with, and I think it goes both ways. But there was a very telling situation in the first year that I had this. I don't really know why anymore I did this, but I mean, of course, there were people that knew that I had this cello now, but it wasn't something that I necessarily really wanted to advertise. And so it's not something that I wanted to be mentioned, let's say, in my biography when I went to play. And whether that was right or wrong, that's how I felt about it at the time. And so if people went to hear me play, they wouldn't necessarily know the instrument that I was playing, at least from what they were reading in the program. They might have heard about it, possibly. But things were different then. I'm not sure that information was so easily available and acquired. So I think, as far as I know, people just heard this cellist play a cello without necessarily knowing what it was. I studied with Janos Starker. I met Leonard Rose once or twice, but I mean, I had no relationship with him, and I never studied with him. I admired him, of course, but that's really as far as it went. That was my personal contact with him. But in that first year, it happened on more than one occasion that somebody from the audience came to talk to me after the concert in the dressing room and asked me if I had studied with Leonard Rose.
What?
That had never happened before, and after that year, it never happened again.
That's like I'm getting like heebie-jeebies.
And I think that proves that with an instrument like this and many instruments, they do have their own life and they do have their own voice, but there's something alive and potentially changeable, like with us. And I think I changed for sure. And I could feel very much the presence of Leonard Rose when I first had this cello. And I felt like the cello was making me play it in a certain way. At the same time, I was also convinced that some of that at least had to do with the cello itself. But I knew that some of it must have had to do with how Leonard Rose played it, and that his personality had been put into this instrument for all those years. And so I would hear that comment, and that was really interesting. After a year or so, I never heard it again. So that at least showed me that something had evolved, had changed. I think it was about the cello itself, and it was about me. And I think that just goes to show that there is a relationship that is established, and there's a response on the part of the instrument itself. And I would even think scientifically that's provable, because after all, we're talking about wood, and we're talking about molecules that are aligned in a certain way, and repeated We know if an instrument is played well for a long time, it will sound better than an instrument that's played badly for a long time. We know that.
Right.
That's said and it's proven, and nobody disputes that. So I would think that there's some scientific reason for that as well. That certain perhaps vibrational patterns are set up, and I'm not able to actually state those kinds of things with certainty, but it seems to me that's true. But over time, the cello started to, let's say, change with how I was responding to the cello and the things that I was looking for and the things that are specific to perhaps the way that I play. But it's really interesting. There are people, of course, many people know I have this cello, but that comment about have I studied with Leonard Rose, that ceased after about a year.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah. I wanted to ask, have you always used gut strings?
For most of my life, I've used gut strings. I started with a teacher in Chicago. I lived in Chicago for 7 years, and I started the cello in Chicago. His name was Carl Frew, and he played beautifully, and he was a very fine teacher. And he used gut strings, as some people did back then. And the cello that I played on at the time, I had gut strings on. I suppose simply because he thought that was a good idea, so that's what I did. So I basically started with gut strings. And then there was a period of time, and there were a couple of other instruments before this one came along, and I tried different things. I always gravitated back towards gut, maybe simply because that's what I started with, and that was something about that's the sound and the kind of characteristics that I identified with, not necessarily this cello because I didn't know it yet, but just the sound of a string instrument and the sound perhaps that I was looking for. And then there was a period of time, a short period of time, where I was trying other strings with this cello, and eventually I went back to gut, and because I felt, nothing is perfect, and somewhere in order to get certain things, you have to give up other things. So I think there are many good string options. I just understood that for me, that was really my way of seeing sound and expression, and as far as the cello itself, I've heard from some people say, well, of course, when you have a cello like that, you can put on gut strings. I don't know if that's specifically true. I think that gut strings are an option. I think that it depends on the instrument. I'm not sure that it has to be this kind of instrument. But again, we can discuss those things. We can go, into the subject. And in the end, I think it's completely personal. Yeah. If I could digress for a second, it doesn't relate to the strings, but it does relate to the cello. My father was a conductor. He passed away now. And I was born in Vancouver, along with my two brothers and my sister. And I remember as a kid, I can't tell you how old I was, but I was less than 8 when we left. So I wasn't even playing the cello yet, because I started on the violin and switched to the cello at 9. And I remember a performance with my father conducting, being in the audience with the Vancouver Symphony. And it was Leonard Rose, and he was playing Tchaikovsky Rococo Variations. And of course, it was this cello, and wow. I still remember that sound. Wow! So I don't know. Is that fate? I don't know. But there was something there. There was something that was planted in my psyche, and yeah, obviously I don't know. I've probably made a lot of bad decisions in my life, but this is not one of them. Yeah. because I'm fairly certain that it is that. But you see these marks? This one, this one. I guess this one too, this one, this one, this one, they're all the same. Almost round black marks. What do you think those might be?
Ash.
Cigarette burns,
Yeah.
Leonard Rose.
Kidding.
Even somebody told me that the cigarette burns of Rose, how do you know? I know. So I thought, yeah, that's what that is. That's what that is. I don't know what else it could be. Even here. I guess I studied with Starker. Starker was a different sort. He held his cigarette here and he could play. Not only did the ashes not fall on the cello, they never fell. Don't ask me how he did it, but he used to play and we would just stare at him. And he'd play and the ash would stay. And then when it was ready, he would ash the cigarette and then go back and play. Well, I don't know which cellist you preferred, but he was better at Rose than Rose at that. Anyway, do you know?
Oh.
You know which ones I mean. These.
The chisel marks.
Yeah. On both sides, just, it's just done with such care.
Yeah.
And, so more than care. A certain aesthetic sense, a certain aesthetic objective. If you're going to do that, you might as well have it add to the beauty of the instrument.
Yeah.
Well, I think Del Jesu was a little bit rougher about those things, right? It's like, look.
Yeah.
Amati, no, it all has to fit into a certain aesthetic.
Yeah.
Special.